Welcome to our weekly market review. I'm joined, as always, by Director George Glenos. George, taking this weekend into consideration, let's not talk about what was and just focus on what is to come, shall we? I think that will be good for both our temperaments here. But Washington really is the focus point this week, starting today. The EU leaders and Zelensky, they're on the way to meet with Donald Trump. And, in a kind of funny way, it feels almost like Zelensky is coming back to Washington with his posse and his wingmen after the dressing down he received in the White House a couple of months ago. Remember, that was quite hectic. But in any case, the one positive out of this, in light of how fractious the relationship has been in recent months between the US and the EU, this almost gives a sense of a bit of unity between the Western leaders, which I think is a positive. But that being said, there are no easy scenarios out of this Ukraine-Russia conflict, not one that I can see. The EU is not bargaining from a place of strength. They've got little to none leverage to really use. So does the Ukraine. And you have Putin really just playing hardball and he's sticking to his guns. He wants regions like Donetsk, for example. He's making some concessions here and there, but he's really keeping the hard line. And of course, we know he might also be just stretching this whole thing out as they finish their summer offensive. They are on the front foot on the battlefield. So you're getting the sense that Putin is not just going to let this go. And really, the only country that has any strong enough power to kind of, strong arm him to a certain extent into a deal is the US. So it's very interesting dynamics playing out. We know Trump also is looking for an off ramp for the US out of this war. He wants to maintain his peacemaker image going on. So it's all these interesting dynamics playing in. And I'm very curious to know what is going to come out of this meeting, because, like I said, I don't see an easy exit strategy out of this entire conflict. So that's the political side. We, of course, know the markets will also be focusing on Jerome, the federal chair Jerome Powell's speech happening at Jackson Hole this week. George, are we expecting kind of for him to just continue with his normal hawkish stance?
It's so difficult for him at the moment because we haven't seen the full impacts of these tariffs. Those are still to come. So through the course of the next few months, we will see the fuller effects of all of that rolling through. It's been quite interesting so far. The impact has been relatively muted compared to what many people had anticipated. So, from that perspective, there've been some pleasant surprises. Some are saying, well, there's a bit of AI that's offsetting that. There's a bit of a weakness in the economy that's offsetting that. So, we shouldn't get too excited about the fact that inflation hasn't kicked through very strongly. Although we did see it come through in the core data. So the core inflation data did reveal some inflationary pressures, and I think we've got to take that pretty seriously because this is just the start of the full effects of the tariffs. Remember, the early phases of the tariffs were mitigated by the fact that they front-loaded their imports into America,
Right.
so that we had to work our way through all of that inventory before you really start to see it show up in consumer prices. So there's still a ways to go until we fully appreciate and understand what the impact of that's going to be. And so I think Jerome Powell has to remain somewhat cautious. He, as much as the expectation is that central banks are going to reduce interest rates over time, I think up front, the Fed has got a little bit of a headache on its hands, and it needs to play its cards fairly close to its chest, and it needs to and not give away too much, not putting themselves into a corner by promising and guiding things in such a clear fashion when you simply don't know. So at this stage, I think they would probably default towards being a little more cautious, with a dovish bias, but more cautious, and that's probably going to frustrate Trump, and it's probably going to come in for criticism, and the usual run of things at the moment. But that's what I suspect we're going to get, and other central banks are going to play more or less a similar tune.
Yes. Well, the one thing that obviously markets will also be looking out for is South Africa's inflation data coming out this week, so we can determine where our central bank is going to move to next. Expectations are for quite a jump from 3 to 3.5%. So my thinking is that this will just provide support for the SARB to not rush into rate cuts. We know Kganyago is very conservative; he likes to hold back, and this could just give him more credence to hold off on further cuts.
Yep, and I think he would be prudent too, regardless. South Africa has to run with very positive real interest rates at the moment, and it's not just for inflation reasons. It's also because of risk assessments towards the country, and the protection of the rand, and a whole host of issues. So we have to run with positive real interest rates. I think that would give him the justification he needs. I think that 3.5% is a bit high. I believe that number could surprise the 3.5% slightly to the downside. It's not to say that inflation is not going to rise. I just think it might be a little more gradual than people anticipate, and it's a weak credit cycle. It's a strong rand. It's a weaker dollar.
Yes.
It's oil prices that I think could still moderate a little bit. All of those factors, I think, still play in South Africa's favor. But we did get some wage increases, which, came through from the public sector. And again, we're talking about, almost double the 3% preference, a Reserve Bank's preference for inflation, which is not a great way to start. Equally, we know that administered price inflation is closer to 10%. So, you've got these factors that you can't get away from that are pretty much baked into the pie, whether you like it or not, which the Reserve Bank's going to have to still push against.
Yeah, especially also in light of them wanting to move their target to that 3% range. So still interesting dynamics in how we're going to play this out. But an interesting week. There are several walls that I wish I could be flies on this week, including in the Springboks locker room. But hopefully we will have some good news on Saturday as far as that is concerned. But otherwise than that, George, we will catch up again next week. Thank you.